My mother-in-law spent years telling the world I wasn't good enough for her family. So on my wedding day, I decided to prove her right. I skipped the ceremony and held a press conference instead, showing everyone that her perfect, untouchable family wasn't good enough for me. If you have ever been made to feel small, unworthy, or invisible by someone who was supposed to love you, then you know what it's like to fight for your own voice. This is the story of how I found mine, not by shouting, but by being silent. Stay with me, because the silence can be the most devastating weapon of all. And if you've ever dreamed of a little justice, hit that like button and subscribe. It tells me that stories like ours deserve to be heard. The first time I entered the Van Doren estate, I felt like I was stepping into a museum. Not a warm, inviting one, but a mausoleum for a family's ego. The air was cold, smelling faintly of lemon polish and old money. Sunlight struggled to pierce the thick, leaded glass windows, falling in dusty shafts across floors of black and white marble that echoed with every hesitant step I took. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following me with silent, aristocratic judgment. This wasn't a home, it was a fortress built to keep the world, and people like me, out. And then I met its queen. Margaret Van Doren was exactly as her house suggested, beautiful, cold, and impeccably preserved. She was tall and slender, with silver hair swept into a flawless chignon that not a single strand would dare escape. She wore a cashmere dress the color of cream and a single, formidable string of pearls. When my fiancé, Thomas, introduced us, she extended a hand that felt like a cool, smooth stone in my own. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes, a pale, glacial blue, were performing a swift and brutal calculation, assessing my dress, my posture, my very existence, and finding it all wanting. "Bella," she said, her voice a low, melodious hum that was somehow more intimidating than a shout. "Thomas has told me so much about you. You're an art curator, is that right? How charming. A lovely little hobby." I had spent 8 years building my career, working my way up from an unpaid intern to a respected curator at a contemporary gallery. I had negotiated multi-million-dollar acquisitions and discovered emerging artists who were now taking the world by storm. I had poured my lifeblood into my work. She had dismissed it all as a hobby in less than 10 seconds. It was the first shot in a war I didn't even know I was supposed to be fighting. Thomas, my Thomas, just squeezed my hand, oblivious. He saw his mother as strong, principled, the matriarch holding their powerful family together. He was deaf to the subtle venom in her words, the elegant cruelty she wielded like a surgeon's scalpel. He saw her love for him as a guiding star. He didn't see that its light cast a dark, consuming shadow on everyone else. Our courtship had been a whirlwind. Thomas was handsome, charismatic, the heir to the Van Doren financial empire. He had swept me off my feet with grand gestures and a seemingly endless well of affection. In his world, away from his family, I felt seen and cherished. But the moment we stepped across the threshold of that marble fortress, I became an accessory, an outsider he had foolishly brought home. The campaign against me was one of psychological warfare, fought on a battlefield of polite smiles and veiled insults. Margaret never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her power lay in her ability to make you feel utterly insignificant with a single, perfectly chosen word. At my first Van Doren dinner party, I wore a simple but elegant black dress. As I sat down, Margaret tilted her head, a small, pitying smile playing on her lips. "Oh, Bella dear," she said, her voice carrying across the glittering table. "That dress is brave. It's so difficult to find quality material these days, isn't it?" All her friends, carbon copies of her in silk and diamonds, offered me thin, knowing smiles. In one sentence, she had branded my dress, and by extension me, as cheap. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck, and I spent the rest of the dinner feeling like a fraud in a borrowed costume. Thomas just laughed it off later. "That's just Mother's way. She's a perfectionist." Another time, she insisted on taking me shopping. She led me through a series of terrifyingly expensive boutiques, her disapproval radiating from her with every item I touched. Finally, she selected a stiff, beige tweed suit that made me look 20 years older. "There," she declared with satisfaction. "Classic. Timeless. It will give you a bit more substance." The implication was clear. I had none of my own. I bought the suit just to end the ordeal, and it hung in my closet like a shroud, a reminder of my own inadequacy in her eyes. The word she used most often, her favorite little dagger, was insufficient. My education was insufficient. My family background was insufficient. My opinions on art, politics, even the weather were all in some way insufficient. She would say it with a sigh, as if my very presence was a burden she was heroically shouldering for the sake of her son's baffling happiness. "She's just testing you," my internal monologue would whisper, a desperate attempt to rationalize the cruelty. "She wants to see if you're strong enough. Just smile. Just endure. Don't let her see she's getting to you." And so I did. I developed a smile that was pure armor. I learned to nod politely while my insides were churning with a mixture of anger and humiliation. I became a master of pleasant, non-committal responses. I was playing a game of survival, hoping that if I was quiet enough, perfect enough, she would eventually accept me. It was a fool's hope. Thomas saw my quietness not as a symptom of my suffering, but as progress. "See," he'd say happily after a tense family dinner, "you and Mother are finally starting to get along. I knew you would." He was so desperate for his two worlds to coexist peacefully that he painted over the cracks with a thick, glossy coat of denial. The day he proposed, he did it in our world. He rented out the entire botanical garden, filling a glass conservatory with thousands of fairy lights. It was breathtakingly romantic. As he got down on one knee, holding out a ring with a diamond so large it seemed vulgar, I found myself hesitating. I wasn't just saying yes to this charming, kind man I loved. I was saying yes to a lifetime of Margaret's icy stares and quiet contempt. I was saying yes to the marble cage. But I loved him. And a part of me, a foolish, optimistic part, believed that being his wife, officially a Van Doren, would grant me the immunity I so desperately craved that I said yes. As he slid the ring onto my finger, it felt less like a promise and more like a shackle. It was heavy, cold, and brilliant, a beautiful prison. I looked at his happy, beaming face and felt a profound sense of dread settle in my stomach. The war was over, I realized. And I had just formally surrendered. I had agreed to the terms of my own slow erasure, and my only hope was that a piece of me might survive. The engagement ring was a declaration. To the world, it was a symbol of love and commitment. To Margaret, it was a starting pistol. Now that I was officially on the path to becoming a Van Doren, my insufficient nature was no longer a private family matter. It was a public relations crisis that required her immediate and absolute control. The first casualty was our engagement party. Thomas and I had envisioned a relaxed, intimate gathering with our closest friends at the art gallery where I worked. Margaret laughed when I told her. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but a light, airy sound of genuine amusement, which was somehow worse. "Oh darling, no," she said, patting my hand as if I were a toddler who had suggested serving mud pies. "An engagement party is a statement. It's the family's opportunity to formally present you to society. It will be held at the country club." And so it was. Margaret curated the guest list, which consisted of 200 people I had never met, bankers, judges, and other society doyens with names that sounded like financial institutions. My handful of friends who did attend huddled together in a corner, looking deeply uncomfortable, their creative, vibrant outfits clashing with the sea of navy blazers and pearl necklaces. Margaret's toast that evening was a masterpiece of passive aggression. She stood before the crowd, a vision in silver silk, and spoke glowingly of her son. When she finally turned to me, she smiled that razor-thin smile. "And to Bella," she said, raising her glass. "We are so intrigued to welcome you to the family. Thomas has always had a penchant for the unconventional. We look forward to watching you grow." The room was filled with polite, knowing laughter. I felt the blood drain from my face. She had just called me her son's strange little project, a fixer-upper, in front of 200 of the most influential people in the city. Thomas, standing beside me, simply squeezed my arm and whispered, "Isn't she great? So elegant." He was a man watching a house burn down and complimenting the beautiful color of the flames. From that day on, my life was no longer my own. The wedding planning was not a collaboration, it was a series of royal decrees issued by Queen Margaret. I was summoned to the estate for daily meetings that felt more like interrogations. My dream of a simple, autumn-themed wedding with warm, rustic colors was dismissed as terribly pedestrian. The wedding, Margaret informed me, would be an all-white affair. It signifies purity and tradition, she said, her eyes lingering on me in a way that made me feel deeply, irrevocably stained. The dress was the next battleground. I found a gown I loved, a soft, A-line silhouette with delicate hand-stitched lace. When I showed Margaret the picture, she pursed her lips. "It's fine, I suppose. If you were getting married in a barn." "No, the Van Doren bride wears couture. I've already made an appointment for you." The dress she chose was a monstrous creation of stiff satin and oppressive boning. It was heavy and architectural, a gown designed to hold you in, to restrict you. Wearing it felt like wearing a beautiful, suffocating cage. Every choice I made was wrong. The peonies I wanted for my bouquet were provincial. The string quartet I suggested was uninspired. The personal vows I had started writing were unnecessary and overly emotional. My identity was being systematically dismantled, erased piece by piece, and replaced with the bland, sterile perfection of the Van Doren brand. I began to feel like a ghost haunting my own life. I'd look in the mirror and see a stranger staring back, a pale, tired woman with a perpetual knot of anxiety in her stomach. I stopped sleeping. I'd lie awake for hours, the silence of the night filled with Margaret's voice, a constant loop of my own inadequacies. Insufficient. Unworthy. A burden. Thomas was increasingly distant, consumed by a high-stakes merger at his company. "I trust you and Mother to handle the details," he'd say, kissing my forehead before disappearing for another 16-hour workday. I was being left alone with my tormentor, and he didn't even see it. The breaking point, the moment the fragile thread of my endurance finally snapped, wasn't about me. It was about my parents. My parents are the kindest, most genuine people you could ever meet. My father is a retired history professor, my mother a landscape gardener. They live in a modest suburban home filled with books, plants, and laughter. They were my anchor, my proof that a world of warmth and unconditional love still existed. Margaret, of course, insisted on hosting a formal luncheon to finally get to know them. I watched in silent horror as the afternoon unfolded. Margaret treated my parents like fascinating, slightly pathetic anthropological subjects. She asked my father, who has a PhD in Renaissance history, "So, you were a teacher? How sweet. It's so important to have a passion, no matter how small." She turned to my mother, whose gardens have won regional awards, and said, "I must get you to look at my hydrangeas sometime. My gardener is simply useless." She asked them invasive, humiliating questions about their mortgage, their car, their retirement savings, all under the guise of polite interest. My parents, bless their hearts, answered with grace and dignity, but I could see the hurt in their eyes. They were being patronized, belittled, in this cold marble mausoleum, and I had brought them here. After they left, their car looking painfully out of place in the long gravel driveway, Margaret turned to me, a sigh escaping her lips. "Well," she said, straightening a silver picture frame, "now I see where you get your simplicity from. They're very decent people, I'm sure." Something inside me fractured. It was a clean, quiet break. The part of me that had been desperately trying to win her approval, to earn my place, simply ceased to exist. All the anger, the humiliation, the resentment I had been swallowing for months, coalesced into a single terrifying moment of clarity. That night, I confronted Thomas. For the first time, my voice wasn't placating or gentle. It was shaking with a rage I didn't know I possessed. "Your mother insulted my parents," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "She spent 2 hours treating them like dirt on her shoe. I will not have it, Thomas. You have to say something." He looked startled, then defensive. "Bella, don't be so dramatic. She was just making conversation. You're being too sensitive." "Sensitive?" I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. She called my father's life's work a small passion. She implied my mother was no better than her hired help. "You're not trying hard enough, Bella." He shot back, his voice rising. "You know how she is. You need to make an effort, meet her halfway." Why do you always have to make things so difficult? And that was it. That was the moment I knew. He would never choose me. He would never defend me. In the eternal war between his mother and his wife, my position would always be the one to be sacrificed for the sake of his own peace and quiet. He wasn't just a bystander to his mother's cruelty, he was an active enabler. A co-conspirator. I walked away without another word. I went into the master bathroom, a cavernous space of marble and gold fixtures, and looked at my reflection. The face staring back was a stranger's, a pale, haunted mask. The tears I expected to come never arrived. The pain and the hurt were still there, but they were being eclipsed by something else. Something cold, hard, and sharp. The desire for love and acceptance was gone. It had been burned away, leaving behind the sterile, empty ground of pure, calculating rage. The internal monologue of pleading and endurance was over. A new voice took its place, quiet and clear as a shard of ice. They will not break you, it said. They will not erase you. They think you are nothing. You will show them what nothing can do. My war of attrition was over. It was time to plan a counteroffensive. The shift in me was so subtle that no one noticed. Outwardly, I became the perfect fiancé, a model of serene compliance. The day after my fight with Thomas, I approached Margaret in the morning room, where she was reading the Financial Times. I was holding the fabric swatches for the reception tablecloths, a battle I had lost weeks ago. "Margaret, you were so right about the damask," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "The brocade I chose was far too busy. Your choice is so much more elegant." She looked up from her paper, her eyes narrowing in surprise, then softening with triumph. She had won. She had finally, completely broken me. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. "I'm glad you're beginning to see reason, dear. It will make the next few months so much more pleasant." Thomas was ecstatic. The tension in our relationship vanished, replaced by his relieved gratitude. "I knew you'd come around," he said, kissing me. "I told you, all it takes is a little effort." He saw my capitulation as a victory for love. He didn't realize it was a declaration of war. My silence, which they had mistaken for submission, now became my greatest weapon. I became an observer, a ghost in their house, collecting data. My mind, which had been clouded with anxiety and hurt, was now sharp, focused, and analytical. I realized that a direct emotional attack on Margaret would be useless. She was impervious to feelings. To truly hurt her, I had to destroy the one thing she held sacred, the Van Doren name. Her status. Her unimpeachable public image. And the main pillar holding that image aloft was the family business, helmed by her perfect son Thomas. I began to listen. Really listen. I sat through painfully boring business dinners, smiling my placid smile, while my brain recorded every scrap of information. I paid attention to Thomas's late-night phone calls, the ones where his voice was tight with stress as he talked about aggressive leveraging, optimizing tax liabilities, and making the quarterly report palatable for the board. They were just words to him, the language of his world. To me, they were clues. My background in the art world had given me a unique skill set. I knew how to research provenance, how to spot a fake, and how to discreetly investigate the wealthy and powerful. I started using my charming little hobby as a cover. I'd attend gallery openings and charity auctions, not to look at the art, but to talk to the people. I'd strike up conversations with bankers, investors, and rival CEOs, all under the guise of soliciting donations for the gallery. I would casually mention Van Doren Industries, and then I would listen. I heard whispers. Rumors of risky investments. Murmurs about Thomas overextending, about the company's profits looking almost too good to be true. It was all smoke, but I knew that where there was this much smoke, there had to be a fire. My target became clear. I needed proof. I needed something concrete, something undeniable that would tear through the pristine facade of their lives. I needed an inside source. Through my research, I identified a man named Arthur Vance. He had been the chief financial officer at Van Doren Industries for over 20 years, a loyal company man from Thomas's father's era. He had been abruptly and unceremoniously fired 6 months ago, replaced by a younger, more ambitious man known for his creative financial strategies. Arthur Vance had signed a non-disclosure agreement thicker than a phone book, but I knew he would be a man with a bruised ego and a deep-seated grudge. He was my perfect mole. Getting to him was a delicate operation. I couldn't just call him. The Van Dorens had eyes and ears everywhere. So I used their own snobbery against them. I knew from my research that Arthur's wife, Eleanor, was a passionate collector of modernist sculpture. I arranged for my gallery to host a private viewing of a new collection, and I sent a personal, handwritten invitation to the Vances. They came. I watched them from across the room, a nervous knot tightening in my stomach. This was the point of no return. I waited for a moment when Arthur was alone, studying a bronze piece. I approached him, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It's a magnificent piece, isn't it?" I said, my voice calm. He grunted in agreement, not looking at me. "It's all about structure," I continued quietly. "How a thing can look so solid on the outside, so powerful. But you have no idea what's holding it up from the inside. Or what's rotting it away." He turned then, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, finally focusing on me. He knew who I was. The future Mrs. Thomas Van Doren. A flicker of understanding, and then suspicion, crossed his face. I didn't say another word. I just slipped a small, folded piece of paper into his hand. On it was a single email address, an encrypted, anonymous one I had created at a public library, and the words, "I think we have a shared interest in artistic integrity." For 3 agonizing days, there was silence. I was convinced I had failed, that he had thrown the note away or worse, reported me to Thomas. Then, an email appeared in my anonymous inbox. It contained a single attachment, a heavily redacted spreadsheet. The message was simple. "Is this the kind of art you're interested in?" It was the beginning of a cautious, clandestine correspondence. Using burner phones and encrypted emails, we communicated. I never told him my goal was revenge. I framed it as a matter of justice, of protecting the legacy of Thomas's father, who Arthur deeply respected. I played on his anger at being cast aside, his pride in his own meticulous work, which was now being dismantled by corporate cowboys. Finally, he agreed to give me everything. We met in a sterile, anonymous hotel bar on the other side of town. He slid a plain manila envelope across the table. Inside was a single flash drive. "Everything is there," he said, his voice low. 2 sets of books. The real ones, and the ones shown to the board. Emails detailing the deliberate misrepresentation of assets. The wire transfers to the offshore shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. It's enough to put him away, or at the very least, ruin him utterly. I took the flash drive, its plastic casing feeling both impossibly light and terrifyingly heavy in my hand. This was it. The weapon. With the evidence secured, the final phase of the plan began to take shape. I didn't want Thomas in jail. I wanted to publicly humiliate Margaret. I wanted to detonate this bomb on the day that was meant to be her crowning achievement, the wedding. I researched the most ruthless, ambitious financial journalist in the city, a man named Julian Croft, known for his ability to smell blood in the water from a mile away. Using another anonymous email, I sent him a single, tantalizing document from the drive, just enough to prove I had the real thing. I told him the full story would be his, an exclusive, on the morning of September 20th. My wedding day. I booked a small conference room at a downtown hotel for 10 a.m. on that same day. I hired a freelance public relations agent, a discreet professional who specialized in crisis management, paying her in cash for a single job, to make one statement on my behalf. The night before my wedding, I wasn't at the lavish rehearsal dinner Margaret was hosting. I had feigned a migraine. Instead, I was in a sterile, anonymous hotel room, the one I'd be leaving from in the morning. The flash drive was sitting on the table next to my laptop. Hanging on the back of the door wasn't the monstrous couture wedding gown. It was a different dress. A simple, elegant sheath dress of ivory silk. It was a dress that meant business. It was my armor. Everything was in place. Every contingency was planned for. My heart was strangely calm. I felt no fear, no regret. Only a profound, chilling sense of purpose. Margaret Van Doren had tried to erase me. But an architect of ruin knows that to bring down a great house, you don't attack the walls. You obliterate the foundation. And tomorrow morning, I was going to press the detonator. The morning of September 20th broke over the city in shades of pearl and rose, a picture-perfect day for a society wedding. I imagined the scene at the Van Doren estate, the flurry of caterers and florists, the clinking of champagne glasses as Margaret and her bridesmaids, women I barely knew, chosen by her, prepared for their moment of triumph. I imagined Thomas, oblivious, straightening his bow tie, thinking of his beautiful, compliant bride. My own morning was a study in quiet efficiency. There was no champagne, no gaggle of laughing friends. There was only black coffee and a single-minded focus. I showered, did my own hair and makeup with practiced precision, and then slipped into the ivory silk sheath. It felt like a second skin, a uniform for the task ahead. At precisely 9 a.m., I sat at the small hotel desk, opened my laptop, and attached the complete, unredacted contents of the flash drive to an email. The recipient was Julian Croft. The subject line read, as promised, the Van Doren facade. I attached a short note, embargoed until 11 a.m. sharp. Happy hunting. Then, I hit send. The sound of the click echoed in the silent room, a point of no return. At 9:30 a.m., my hired PR agent, a sharp woman named Sarah, arrived. We didn't speak much. She knew her job. I was just a client. She handed me a set of printed index cards. Your presence is all that's required, she said. I'll handle the rest. We took a town car to the downtown hotel where I had booked the conference room. The press was already gathering, a small throng of reporters from the city's major news outlets and society blogs. They had been tipped off about a significant announcement regarding the wedding of the year. They smelled a story, but they had no idea the scope of it. They probably expected an announcement of a last-minute venue change or a celebrity guest. We waited in a small adjoining room until exactly 10 a.m. Through the door, I could hear the buzz of impatient journalists. Sarah looked at me, raising an eyebrow. Ready? I took a single, deep breath, and nodded. We walked into the conference room. The moment I appeared, the room erupted in a blinding cascade of camera flashes. The reporters surged forward, shouting questions. I walked calmly to the podium, my face a serene, unreadable mask, and stood just behind it. I did not speak. I did not need to. Sarah stepped up to the microphone. The room gradually fell silent. Thank you all for coming, she began, her voice crisp and professional. My name is Sarah Jennings, and I am speaking today on behalf of Ms. Bella Croft. The use of my own surname, not my future one, was the first small, sharp cut. Miss Croft has asked me to announce that she has officially called off her engagement to Mr. Thomas Van Doren, and the wedding, scheduled for today, will not be taking place. A collective gasp went through the room. The cameras flashed with renewed intensity. The reporters began shouting over one another. Sarah held up a hand for silence. We will not be taking questions at this time. However, Miss Croft believes the reasons for her decision are a matter of public interest, especially for the shareholders of Van Doren Industries. Therefore, we direct your attention to an investigative report by journalist Julian Croft, which I believe, she paused, glancing at her watch, should be breaking right now. On cue, a dozen phones in the room began to buzz and ping with news alerts. A reporter in the front row stared at his screen, his eyes widening. He looked up at me, then back at his phone, a look of dawning shock on his face. The headline read, Van Doren heir accused of massive fraud, leaked documents reveal shell corporations, falsified earnings AS wedding of the year IS abruptly cancelled. The chaos in that room was immediate and absolute. Reporters were scrambling, shouting into their phones, typing frantically on laptops. They had come for a society tidbit and had been handed the biggest financial scandal of the decade. Through it all, I remained silent, standing behind the podium, an island of calm in the hurricane I had unleashed. I watched their frenzy for another minute, letting the reality of what I had done sink in. Then, I turned and walked out the way I had come, leaving Sarah to manage the fallout. The sound of the snapping cameras followed me down the hall, but it was no longer a sound of judgment. It was the sound of my victory. I didn't go home. Instead, I had the driver take me on a slow, circuitous route past the Grand Cathedral where the wedding was supposed to have taken place. It was 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The scene was one of utter pandemonium. Well-dressed guests were huddled on the cathedral steps, not in anticipation, but in stunned, gossiping clusters. They were all staring at their phones, their faces a mixture of shock and salacious delight. News vans, redirected from my press conference, were already pulling up, satellite dishes rising towards the sky. The fortress was under siege. I saw a limousine pull up, and Margaret emerged. She looked regal, perfect in a mother-of-the-bride dress of dove grey. Her face was a mask of triumphant serenity. She clearly hadn't heard yet. She smiled at the cameras, a queen arriving for her coronation. Then, a young assistant ran up to her, holding out a phone, her face pale with panic. I had the driver stop the car across the street, shielded by a line of trees. I rolled down the tinted window and I watched. I watched as Margaret's eyes scanned the phone screen. I watched as her triumphant smile faltered, then froze. I watched the color drain from her face, leaving behind a pasty, ashen gray. Her perfectly composed features seemed to crumble, to melt like a wax figure held too close to a flame. The reporters, smelling blood, swarmed her. She looked around, trapped, her eyes wide with a horror so profound it was almost beautiful. Her perfect day, her perfect sun, her perfect world, all of it had been turned to ash in a single morning. And she was standing at the epicenter of the inferno. I didn't need to see Thomas. His public execution was already complete. Margaret's was far more personal. I had taken her greatest source of pride and turned it into her deepest public shame. I rolled up the window. "Take me to the airport," I told the driver. As the car pulled away, I didn't look back. I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying begin to lift from my shoulders. It was the weight of her judgment, of my own insufficiency, of years spent smiling through pain. It all just evaporated. Margaret had spent years trying to make me small, to make me silent. She had succeeded in making me silent. But she never understood that my silence wasn't submission. It was observation. It was strategy. And in the end, my silence was the loudest sound in the world, a thunderclap that brought her entire marble house crashing down. For the first time in years, I was free. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But sometimes, it isn't about serving anything at all. Sometimes, it's about simply walking away from the table and letting the corrupt banquet collapse under the weight of its own lies. True power isn't about having the last word, it's about creating a truth so undeniable that no more words are needed. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of quiet strength, share your thoughts in the comments below. And please, subscribe for more stories of justice being served, not always loudly, but always completely. Remember, even the quietest voice can start an earthquake.